My name is Eleanor, and at 68, I am a widow and a retired architect. For 4 decades, I designed the very foundations of the world my son now takes for granted. His private school fees, his first sports car, even the deposit on the fashionable townhouse he shares with his wife in Cheltenham. I never asked for anything in return. When my husband, Richard, passed away, I inherited a considerable fortune, which I quietly and carefully ring-fenced in a series of trusts. I never imagined I'd need it as a shield against my own child. It was at my birthday lunch, of all places, that he stood up and demanded I sign over half of my estate. He deserved it now, he'd insisted, not when I was, in his words, 6 feet under. I told him no, calmly, firmly, and in front of everyone. His wife, our few remaining family friends, the waiter hovering with the dessert menu. The slap was so sharp, so unexpected, it silenced the entire restaurant. "You're nothing but a walking cash point," he sneered, his face a mask of fury. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply met his gaze and allowed a small, knowing smile to touch my lips, because everything he believed was his birthright had, in that single violent moment, ceased to exist. It was locked away, far beyond his greedy reach. And what came next was a lesson in architecture that none of them would ever forget. Sunday morning in the Cotswolds has a rhythm all its own. The rolling hills, stitched together with ancient stone walls, rise and fall like the gentle breathing of a sleeping giant. I used to enjoy the stillness from my kitchen window, a mug of strong black coffee in hand, watching the honey-colored stone of my village slowly catch the morning light. But this particular Sunday was different. James had insisted on a family brunch at the Orangery at Burford Manor, one of those places where the Eggs Benedict cost a small fortune and people go to be seen rather than to eat. I should have known something was amiss when Chloe arrived. She was a masterpiece of calculated allure, poured into a blush-colored silk dress that seemed to whisper of scandalous expense with every rustle. It clung to the curve of her hip as she shifted in her seat, a deliberate, almost predatory grace in her movements. Her smile, which she reserved for Instagram cameras and potential investors, was dazzling and utterly vacant. My daughter-in-law, at 32, had perfected the art of looking effortlessly spontaneous while every gesture was calibrated to the millimeter. James, my 35-year-old son, wore a white linen shirt that probably cost more than some families spend on a weekly shop. He told me I looked well, planting a kiss on my cheek with the mechanical familiarity he'd perfected over the years. It wasn't genuine affection. It was the kind of gesture he made when he was about to ask for something. I had dressed in my usual quiet style, a gray cashmere jumper I'd owned for a decade, but which still looked impeccable, and my pearls. The same pearls I was wearing the day I won the commission to redesign the Bristol City Library, back when I still believed that hard work and integrity were currency enough to earn your family's respect. Chloe announced she had secured my favorite table, gesturing towards the terrace overlooking the manicured rose gardens. For the first few minutes, we maintained the charade of a happy family. She chattered about her latest collaboration with an organic, cruelty-free, moon-dusted homeware brand, while James nodded with the intense focus of someone who had memorized her talking points. I listened, sipped my coffee, and watched the other diners cast surreptitious glances our way. The Cotswolds, for all their sprawling beauty, could feel like a very small village, and people knew the name Lancaster, even if only in passing. It was when the main course arrived that James shifted gears. He needed to talk to me about something important, he said, cutting into his waffle with an almost surgical precision. He and Chloe had been working on an incredible investment opportunity. I recognized the tone. It was the same one he'd used at 8 years old when he wanted a new bicycle, only now the bicycles cost £250,000. Chloe leaned forward, her eyes wide with the same manufactured intensity she used for her behind-the-scenes videos. It was a once-in-a-lifetime chance, a disruptive lifestyle brand that was poised to revolutionize the market. They thought of me immediately, she purred, because I'd always had such a keen eye for a solid investment. I knew exactly where this was heading, but I decided to let them play their hand. After 40 years of designing buildings, I'd learned that the best way to understand a structure is to watch where the pressure is applied. The problem, James said, setting down his cutlery, was time. They needed to move quickly, very quickly. He cleared his throat. And, well, they would need access to part of the inheritance. Now, before, I looked at him, my expression as neutral as when I reviewed structural load calculations. How much? 250,000 pounds. Chloe said, the words tumbling out in a single breathless rush. I know it sounds like a lot, she added, but the projected return on investment is 300% in the first year. I remained silent, observing their faces. James had that anxious, pleading look he'd developed since marrying Chloe, as if he were constantly trying to grasp something just out of his reach. Chloe, on the other hand, maintained her influencer's smile, but I could see the fine lines of tension around her perfectly made-up eyes. The inheritance is structured in a specific way for a reason, I said finally. The funds are to be released upon my death, not before. But Mum, James leaned forward, his voice taking on a wheedling tone. It's just an advance. It's a smart investment. I've been making smart investments since before you were born, James. That's why the inheritance exists in the first place. Chloe exchanged a look with James, one of those silent, loaded communications that couples develop. Then she turned to me, her voice softer, more intimate. Eleanor, I understand you might be cautious. It's admirable, really, but sometimes I think that perhaps, well, your generation sees things differently. The business world moves so fast now. The condescension was subtle, but it was there, sharp as a shard of glass. The implication that my age made me less capable of understanding the modern world, as if 68 years of experience were a liability rather than an asset. My generation built the wealth your generation wants to spend, I replied, my tone unchanged. The atmosphere at the table instantly turned to ice. James stiffened, and Chloe's smile became a brittle, painted-on thing. It's not about spending, Mum, it's about investing. Growing what you already have. And what happens if the investment fails? It won't fail, James said, with a conviction that sounded more like desperation than confidence. Chloe's done the research. We have contacts. The same contacts who told you that Artisan Dog Biscuit Company was going to be the next big thing? Chloe flushed slightly. They had lost 30,000 pounds on that venture the previous year. That was different, she muttered. And the travel blog? The line of yoga wear for cats? It was a joke, but a bitter one. Mum, please, James raised his voice just enough for the nearby tables to turn. This isn't about past failures. It's about the future. Our future. Your future is not my responsibility, James. It never has been. The words came out colder than I'd intended, but they were true. I had raised him, worked tirelessly to ensure he had every opportunity one never did. But somewhere along the way, my son had mistaken my love for an obligation to finance his whims. You know what, he said, standing up abruptly. I'm tired of this. Tired of having to beg you for every little thing. You act like you're some sort of queen on a throne of money, when all you are is a tight-fisted old woman who can't stand to see her own family succeed. The chatter at the surrounding tables died. I could feel their stares, hear the muffled whispers. Chloe put a hand on James's arm, but he shook it off. Do you know what I think? He continued, his voice filling the space between us like a poison. I think you enjoy having this power over us. It's the only way you can feel important anymore. I remained silent. I had learned through decades of dealing with difficult clients and hostile contractors that silence is often the most powerful response. But my silence only seemed to enrage him further. Say something, he shouted. At least have the decency to defend yourself. And then it happened. So fast my mind took a moment to process it. The crack of his palm against my cheek echoed in the sudden, absolute silence of the orangery. I felt the sting on my skin, the metallic taste of shock in my mouth. But more than the physical pain, it was the humiliation that pierced me like a blade. My own son, my only son, in public. You're nothing but a walking cash point, he roared, his face red with rage and perhaps, just perhaps, a flicker of horror at what he'd just done. That's all you've ever been. A walking cash point. I could see, in my peripheral vision, a phone being raised. The small red light of a recording blinked like a malevolent eye. Someone was capturing this moment for posterity. Chloe was ashen, Monday morning arrived with the crisp, clean light that follows a thunderstorm. I awoke at 5:30, as I have for the last 40 years, but this time it was not habit that pulled me from my sleep. It was a cold, clear sense of purpose, a feeling I hadn't experienced with such intensity since my final university exams. The grandfather clock in the hall had chimed every hour of the night, and I had heard each one, my mind a whirring engine of calculations and plans. Frances arrived at 8 o'clock, punctual as the Angelus bell. I'd known her since we were both 28, working in the same brutalist office block in Bristol. She a junior accountant, me the only female architect in a firm of 10 men. We had navigated the treacherous waters of a professional world that expected women to be little more than decorative and efficient. I already had 2 mugs of coffee waiting on the kitchen table. She sat down, her leather briefcase placed squarely beside her chair, her sharp eyes taking in my face. The faint bruising on my cheek was already beginning to show, a pale yellow and violet shadow. "Before we do anything, Eleanor," she said, her voice low and serious, "I need you to tell me exactly what happened." I recounted the entire sordid affair, every condescending word, every dismissive gesture, every entitled glance. When I reached the part about the slap, Frances closed her eyes for a brief moment, a pained expression flitting across her face. "The bastard," she murmured, then immediately apologized. Frances rarely swore, but when she did, you knew the fury was genuine. "But there's more," I said, turning my tablet towards her. Overnight, someone had uploaded the video to Twitter. It already had over 50,000 views and hundreds of comments. Most expressed shock and sympathy, but a predictable few questioned why a wealthy, selfish mother wouldn't just help her children. "Have you seen this?" Frances pointed to Chloe's Instagram page, which she had already pulled up on her phone. It was a post from the previous night, an artfully lit, black and white photo of her. A single, perfect tear tracing a path through her flawless makeup. The caption began, "When an older family member begins to struggle with their cognitive health, the whole family suffers." The rage I felt was so pure and crystalline it could have cut glass. "She's trying to control the narrative," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "And she's doing it badly," Frances countered, a grim satisfaction in her tone. "People aren't stupid, Eleanor. They can see what really happened." We finished our coffee in a shared, determined silence. Then, Frances opened her briefcase. "I took the liberty of calling Alistair Finch last night. He can see us at 10. Alistair Finch was 40, a solicitor who specialized in elder law and asset protection. Frances had recommended him after he'd represented her own mother in a case of financial abuse by a predatory caregiver. His office was in a Grade 2 listed Georgian townhouse in Bath, a building whose preservation I had once consulted on during my time on the city's planning commission. "Mrs. Lancaster," Alistair said, rising as we entered. He was a tall, lean man, impeccably dressed in a dark gray suit that fit his shoulders perfectly. His eyes, behind a pair of modern, wire-rimmed glasses, were sharp and missed nothing. "I'm very sorry for the circumstances that bring you here." We sat in his office, surrounded by shelves of leather-bound legal tomes. It reminded me of my own study, filled with architectural manuals and building codes. We were both architects of a sort. He built legal fortifications while I built physical ones. "Frances has given me the broad strokes," he said, "but I need to hear the details directly from you." I told the story again. This time it was easier, the emotion stripped away, leaving only the cold, hard facts. "Have there been other incidents of aggression or abuse?" he asked, taking meticulous notes. "Not physical," I confirmed, "but emotional and financial, yes. Especially in the last 2 years since he married Chloe." "Do they have power of attorney?" "No. I never gave it to them." "Direct access to your accounts?" "Only the monthly standing order, which I cancelled last night." Alistair nodded, visibly relieved. He had seen too many cases where the damage was already irreversible. "Good. We have several options," he said. "First, I want you to report the assault to the police. The video will serve as incontrovertible evidence." The thought of involving the police made me uneasy. I had spent my life resolving my problems privately. It's important for two reasons, he continued, sensing my hesitation. 1, it establishes an official record. 2, if they ever try to challenge your mental competency, we will have documentation proving you were the victim of abuse, not the perpetrator. That made perfect structural sense. In my career, I had learned that documentation was everything. What else? We are going to restructure your entire estate. Your will, your trusts, your properties. We will create an ironclad living trust that will be, for all intents and purposes, impenetrable. Frances leaned forward. We've already run some preliminary numbers. She opened a folder. Between property, investments, and cash, we're looking at a net worth of approximately £4.2 million. It was more than even I had realized. 40 years of disciplined saving, careful investment, and a favorable property market had accumulated a fortune that surprised even me. And the property's James' uses? Alistair asked. The townhouse in Cheltenham is in my name, I said. I pay the mortgage and the service charges. They also have the use of a holiday cottage in Pulpero, which is also mine. Perfect. We can revoke their access to both properties immediately. We spent the next 2 hours going through every facet of my financial life. Alistair was meticulous, asking questions I wouldn't have thought to ask myself. When we were finished, I had a clear list of actions. One more thing, he said as we prepared to leave. Have you considered an alternative beneficiary for the trust? The question caught me off guard. I had been so focused on removing James that I hadn't truly considered who would replace him. I have some ideas, I said, though in truth I had none. That afternoon, after Frances had left, I sat at my computer. The name came to me suddenly, a spark in my memory like a flint striking steel. Priya Sharma. She had been a sixth form student, part of a REBA outreach program I supported for gifted youngsters from disadvantaged backgrounds. She was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I remembered her clearly. A whip-smart teenager with intense, curious eyes who asked insightful questions about structural engineering and sustainable design. She had grown up in the care system but had a fire in her, a determination that reminded me of myself at that age. I found her on LinkedIn. She had earned a first-class degree in architecture from the University of Bath and was now working for a small, forward-thinking firm in Manchester, while studying for her master's online. Her profile picture showed the same intensity one remembered, now tempered with a quiet confidence. Her bio read, "Designing spaces that foster community and honor sustainability." That evening I drafted an email. Dear Priya, you may not remember me, but I am Eleanor Lancaster. You interned with my firm over a decade ago. I have been following your career with great interest and am so impressed with the work you are doing. I wonder if you might be free for lunch sometime next week. There are some opportunities one would like to discuss with you. With kindest regards, Eleanor. I sent it before I could second-guess myself. That night, before bed, I checked my phone one last time. The video of the slap now had over 200,000 views. The comments had multiplied, the vast majority siding with me. A few people had identified James and Chloe, and their own social media accounts were reportedly being flooded with criticism. But one comment stood out. This woman built a life with dignity and hard work. Her son is a parasite who doesn't understand the value of her sacrifice. I hope she finds the strength to cut the strings. Cut the strings. The phrase resonated deep within me. I had spent decades building a safety net for James, but safety nets can become cages. It was time to cut the strings. The next morning, a reply from Priya was waiting in my inbox. Dear Mrs. Lancaster, of course I remember you. You changed the course of my life in ways you probably can't imagine. I would be honored to have lunch with you. I can drive down to the Cotswolds whenever is convenient. With sincere gratitude, Priya. I smiled for the first time since Sunday. That afternoon, I walked into the local police station and filed a report. The officer was professional and empathetic, especially after I showed him the video. As I walked out into the cool autumn air, I felt lighter than I had in years. The plans were drawn. The foundations were being assessed. James thought he could demolish me with a slap and a few cruel words. He had no idea that he had just woken the architect inside me. And architects know that before you can build something new, You sometimes have to demolish what no longer serves. The precision of a controlled demolition had always fascinated me. In my career, I'd witnessed several grand old buildings reduced to rubble in seconds, but only after weeks of meticulous preparation. Every explosive charge strategically placed, every stress point calculated to the millimeter. What appears instantaneous is, in fact, the culmination of extraordinarily careful planning. Friday arrived with the particular golden light of a Cotswolds autumn. For my lunch with Priya, I had chosen a quiet pub with a roaring fire in a nearby village, a place where we could talk without our every word being scrutinized. I dressed in my usual style, a navy blazer and a simple silk shirt. And my pearls. Always my pearls. Priya arrived exactly on time, a quality I appreciated immediately. She had changed in the 10 years since I'd last seen her. Gone was the lanky, slightly hesitant teenager. In her place stood a woman of 28, with a calm, self-assured presence. She wore a simple, well-cut dress in a deep forest green, her only accessory a silver pendant shaped like a drafting compass. "Mrs. Lancaster," she said, her smile genuine and warm. "So good to see you. Please call me Eleanor. I'm no longer your boss." We settled into a comfortable nook by the fire, and for the first few minutes we caught up. Priya told me about her work in Manchester, designing a community hub for a deprived inner-city neighborhood. Her eyes lit up as she spoke of the project, a complex that integrated affordable housing with a library, a skills workshop, and a rooftop garden. "It's the kind of work you taught me to value," she said. "Design that serves people, not just egos." As she spoke, I remembered exactly why she had impressed me so much a decade ago. Priya possessed that rare combination of technical talent and genuine compassion. "Tell me about your master's," I prompted. "Sustainable community development. My dissertation is on how architectural design can combat social isolation in post-industrial towns." She paused, as if catching herself. "But I don't imagine you invited me here to talk about my education." She was direct. "I liked that too. You're right, Priya. I find myself in a position where I am reevaluating my priorities and my legacy." I told her about my situation, carefully editing the most personal, painful details, but being clear about the essentials. My son had shown his true colors, and I was looking for new ways to ensure my life's work would benefit someone who deserved it. "I've been thinking of establishing a foundation," I said, "a trust to support young women in architecture, especially those who, like you, have had to fight harder for their opportunities." Priya's eyes welled with tears, but she blinked them back with the same discipline I had admired in her all those years ago. "Eleanor, that would be extraordinary. There are so many brilliant girls out there who never even get to see that architecture is a possibility for them. I'd like you to consider being a part of it," I continued. "Not just as a beneficiary, but as a founding trustee, as the architect of the program." We spent the next hour sketching out possibilities on a napkin. Priya had clear, brilliant ideas about how to structure a program that would truly make a difference. As she talked, I could see her mind at work, building systems and processes with the same care she used to design buildings. By the time we said our goodbyes, my decision was made. Priya Sharma would be my legacy, not out of spite for James, but because she represented everything I had ever valued: integrity, hard work, and the desire to use one's talents to improve the lives of others. The following Monday, Frances brought the really interesting news. "Have you seen social media?" she asked, striding into my kitchen with her laptop. "You know I haven't." "Well, you should see this." She opened her computer to Chloe's Instagram page. The most recent post was a dramatically staged photo of cardboard boxes and designer luggage. The caption read, "Taking a necessary mental health break. Sometimes life forces you to make changes you never expected." "What does that mean?" "Keep reading the comments," Frances said with a wry smile. The comments painted a clear picture. Several of the brands Chloe had partnered with had publicly terminated their contracts in the wake of the restaurant video. Apparently, artisanal candle companies didn't want to be associated with public displays of familial violence. "There's more," Frances said, navigating to another page. It was a screenshot of an eviction notice, taped to a familiar-looking green door in Cheltenham. Someone had photographed it and posted it on Twitter with the caption, Guess slapping your rich mum has consequences. I felt a strange and unsettling mix of satisfaction and sorrow. When did you cancel his standing order? The Sunday night, after the incident. So they've been on their own for 2 weeks. No monthly allowance from you, no income from Chloe's brand deals. Francis paused. Eleanor, they probably have no savings. People like that, they live right up to the edge of their income, no matter how much they make. She was right. I'd seen enough of their spending habits to know they lived a life funded entirely by my support and Chloe's fleeting brand partnerships. A life that was completely unsustainable. What about the townhouse? I asked. It's technically yours, Francis reminded me. You can revoke their right to occupy it whenever you choose. That afternoon, I called Alistair. How quickly can you process the revocation of access? For which property? All of them, I said. The townhouse in Cheltenham. The cottage in Pulpero. Everything. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Eleanor, that will leave them effectively homeless. They can find their own place to live like normal adults. I understand. I can have the papers filed by tomorrow. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. But it was on Thursday that things truly began to accelerate. Francis arrived with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. What now? Chloe posted something last night, she said. It's different. She showed me her phone. The Instagram post was a series of screenshots of text messages, allegedly between her and me. The messages painted me as a manipulative, abusive matriarch, threatening to destroy their lives if they didn't bend to my will. The problem was, the messages were laughably fake. They're forgeries, I said immediately. I know that. Anyone who knows you would know that. But a lot of people don't know you, and there's something else. Francis scrolled down. The first few dozen comments had been supportive of Chloe. But then the tide had turned. More recent comments were pointing out inconsistencies. Flaws in the timestamps, differences in the font, obvious editing errors. One comment read, "This is so fake. My gran is the same age and can barely use WhatsApp, let alone craft threats like a Bond villain." Another, "Seriously? We're supposed to believe a 68-year-old wrote, 'I will end your brand and your marriage'? This is pure soap opera. It's turning into a scandal," Francis said. "People are starting to see this as a calculated smear campaign against you." She was right. Within hours, the hashtag Justice for Eleanor began trending locally. Amateur sleuths on Twitter had started their own investigations, finding more and more evidence that the screenshots had been doctored. That afternoon, Chloe deleted the post, but it was too late. By nightfall, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Lancaster? This is Jennifer Wells from BBC Points West. I was wondering if you'd be willing to make a statement about..." I hung up and switched off my phone. I didn't need to talk to reporters. The facts were speaking for themselves. That night, I reflected on how things had shifted. I had started as the victim of a public humiliation, but somehow, I had become a figure of public sympathy. James and Chloe, on the other hand, had gone from being a glamorous couple to the villains of a drama of their own making. The controlled demolition was working exactly as planned. But this was just the first phase. The foundations had been weakened, the charges were in place, but the main structure was still standing. It was time for the next stage. I picked up the phone and dialed Alistair's number. "The revocation papers. Are they ready?" "Yes, but Eleanor, once we file these, there's no going back." "Are you absolutely sure?" I looked out of my study window at the rolling hills, dark and silent under a blanket of stars. "I've never been more sure of anything, Alistair." "Then I'll file them first thing in the morning." I hung up and poured myself a small glass of whiskey. In exactly 24 hours, James and Chloe would discover they no longer had a home. And only then would they truly begin to understand what it meant to be completely, utterly on their own. Friday dawned with that specific, sharp clarity that precedes life-altering events. I was awake at 5, as always, but this time with the certain knowledge that by sunset, everything would have irrevocably changed. Alistair, true to his word, was ruthlessly efficient. By 9 a.m., the revocation documents had been filed, and a locksmith was en route to the Cheltenham townhouse. He had also arranged for a constable to be present, a measure to ensure the process was civil and entirely by the book. Francis arrived at 8:30, carrying coffee and wearing an expression that had become familiar over the past few weeks. Half concern, half fierce admiration. "How are you feeling?" she asked, settling at my kitchen table. "Like I'm about to present final plans after months of work," I replied. "Nervous, but certain every calculation is correct." My phone rang at 10:17. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I knew who it was before I answered. "Mom?" James's voice was raw, frantic. "What's going on?" "There are police here and a locksmith and they're saying we have to leave." "Good morning, James." "Don't you good morning me. What the hell is happening?" "I am reclaiming my properties. The townhouse is in my name. It always has been. You no longer have permission to reside there. You can't do this. This is our home." "No," I said, my voice as calm and level as when explaining building codes to difficult clients. "It is my property." You were guests who overstayed their welcome. I could hear panicked voices in the background. The scrape of boxes, Chloe either crying or screaming. I couldn't be sure which. "Mom, please, we can talk about this. We can fix this." "How did you fix things when you struck me in public?" There was a choked silence on the other end. That was a mistake. I was stressed, and "James, I am hanging up now. The constable has instructions to give you until 5 o'clock this afternoon to remove your personal belongings. After that, anything left will be considered abandoned." "Wait, don't you?" I ended the call. Francis was watching me, her expression unreadable. "What?" I asked. "I've never seen you like this," she said. "Like what?" "Completely in control." She was right. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, I felt entirely in command of my own life. I wasn't reacting to the demands of others, wasn't trying to keep the peace, wasn't prioritizing anyone's feelings above my own dignity. The phone rang incessantly for the rest of the morning. James, unknown numbers I assumed were Chloe, even a few reporters who had somehow got hold of my number. I let it all go to voicemail. At 2 p.m., I received the call that actually mattered. "Eleanor? It's Jennifer Wells from the BBC again. I know you don't want to speak to the media, but you need to know we're running a story tonight about the situation. We would much rather include your perspective." This time I didn't hang up. "What kind of story?" "Honestly, it's very favorable to you. We've investigated your daughter-in-law's claims about those faked text messages, and we've also confirmed the incident at the restaurant. We want to frame it as a piece on the financial abuse of older adults." I considered my options. I could remain silent, but that would allow others to control my story. Or I could take control of it myself. "I won't appear on camera," I said finally. "Would you be willing to do a telephone interview? We can disguise your voice to protect your privacy. Give me an hour to think about it." I called Alistair for his counsel. "Legally, there's no issue," he advised. "In fact, it could be beneficial to have your version of events on the public record. Just stick to the facts. State what happened." I decided to do it. Jennifer Wells proved to be a skilled journalist. She asked direct, fair questions. I told her about the restaurant, the constant financial demands, the falsified screenshots. I kept my voice calm and factual. But it was near the end of the interview that I said something I knew would resonate. "I want people to understand something," I said, my voice steady. "We are not walking cash points. We are women who have built lives, made sacrifices, created legacies. And we deserve to be seen as whole human beings, not as funding sources for the fantasies of others." When I finished the call, I felt strangely unburdened. The report aired at 6. Francis recorded it and showed it to me that evening. Watching the story from the outside was surreal. Jennifer Wells had done an excellent job, contextualizing my experience within the broader issue of elder abuse. They had even managed to get footage of James and Chloe leaving the townhouse that day, hauling boxes and suitcases, looking small and defeated. For the first time, I felt a flicker of something akin to pity for them, but it was a distant pity, the kind one might feel for strangers who had made a series of spectacularly bad choices. The impact was immediate. My phone lit up with messages of support. One made me weep. "Mrs. Lancaster, I am a 72-year-old woman whose son has been pressuring me for money to cover his gambling debts. Seeing your story gave me the courage to finally say no. Thank you for showing us we can fight back. There were dozens more like it. My story had struck a chord. But it was the following Monday that the true consequences became apparent. Frances arrived with a stack of newspapers. You're famous, she said, spreading them on my table. The Bristol Post, local woman fights back against familial financial abuse. The Times had a think piece, the Lancaster case, when adult children become financial predators. ARP magazine had already called, asking for an interview. There's more, Frances said, opening her laptop. James has appeared on a local credit blacklist. And Chloe has deleted all of her social media accounts. Instagram, Twitter, everything. It's the complete end of her personal brand. Where are they living? I asked. I don't know. The constable said they just left. Didn't say where they were going. That afternoon, as I worked in my study, setting up the legal framework for the new foundation I would establish with Priya, I reflected on the events of the last few weeks. I had begun this journey feeling like a victim, but in the process of defending myself, I had become something else, a symbol of resistance. My phone rang. This time I recognized the number. It was Priya. Eleanor, I just saw the news. Are you all right? I'm better than all right, I said, and for the first time in weeks it was completely true. Priya, how soon can you take a leave of absence from your job in Manchester? I think it's time we officially got started on the foundation. Seriously? Very. And I think we should call it the Lancaster Foundation for Women in Architecture. Let my name stand for something good for generations to come. After I hung up, I walked out onto my terrace and looked at the hills. The sun was setting, painting the peaks in shades of gold and violet. It was beautiful as it had always been. But this time I saw it with different eyes. I was no longer just Eleanor Lancaster, the woman who had been reduced to a walking cash point. I was now Eleanor Lancaster, the woman who had decided her legacy would be built on her own terms. And that legacy was just beginning. 3 weeks after the eviction, I was in my study, reviewing the final charter for the foundation, when I heard the sound I had been unconsciously expecting. Slow, hesitant footsteps on my gravel drive, followed by a soft knock on the door. Not the aggressive rap I would have expected from the James of before, but something tentative, almost fearful. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the October light filtered through my windows with that golden quality that had always soothed me. In the 4 weeks since the slap, I had completely rebuilt not just my financial structures, but my very sense of self. I walked to the door without haste. Through the frosted glass, I could see a stooped, slender silhouette. When I opened it, it took me a moment to recognize the man standing before me. James had lost a significant amount of weight. His clothes, once impeccably tailored, now hung from his frame as if borrowed. His hair, which Chloe had always ensured was perfectly coiffed, was unkempt and needed cutting. But it was his eyes that struck me most. The familiar arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow, haunted look. "Hello, Mum," he said, his voice raspy, as if he hadn't used it in days. "James, can I talk to you? Just for a minute?" I had rehearsed this moment in my mind dozens of times. In some versions, I slammed the door in his face. In others, I unleashed a torrent of righteous fury. But looking at this broken man on my doorstep, I felt something I hadn't anticipated. A deep, profound calm. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. He entered slowly, looking around the house he had grown up in as if seeing it for the first time. Perhaps he was. When he lived here, he had always been too busy wanting to be somewhere else to truly see what he had. "Coffee?" I asked. "No, thank you." He remained standing in the hall, hands shoved deep into his pockets. "Mom, I don't know where to begin." "Then perhaps you should start by sitting down." He perched on the edge of the sofa like a child awaiting a telling off. It was jarring to see my 35-year-old son, the man who had screamed at and struck me, now adopting the posture of someone utterly defeated. "Where's Chloe?" I asked. "She left," he said, the words seeming to cause him physical pain. "A week ago. Said she needed to reevaluate her brand, and that I was toxic to her personal growth." I felt no satisfaction, only a distant sadness. Chloe had been part of the problem, but she was also a product of a culture that valued appearance over substance. In a way, she too was a victim of her own illusions. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. He looked at me, genuinely surprised. No one deserves to be abandoned when things get difficult, no matter what mistakes they've made. James was quiet for a long moment. "Mom, I need you to know about what happened at the restaurant." His voice broke. "There's no excuse for what I did. There's no explanation that makes it any less terrible." "You're right," I said simply. "There isn't. I've replayed it 1,000 times in my head. Your face when I hit you. And what I said." He covered his face with his hands. "God, what I said to you. A walking cash point," I said quietly. "Yes." The word came out as a whisper. "How could I have said that? How could I have reduced everything you are, everything you've done for me, to that?" It was a good question. One I had been asking myself for weeks. "James," I said, my voice gentle but firm, "let's take a walk through this house. I want you to really look at it." He looked confused but nodded. We started in the living room. "The sofa," I said, touching the worn velvet. "I bought this when you were 17. You wanted a comfortable place to study for your A-levels. It cost £800, which at the time was more than I spent on myself in 6 months. James stared at the sofa as if he'd never seen it before. We moved to the kitchen. "This table," I continued, running my hand over the smooth oak surface. "I built this myself. On weekends over 2 months. I couldn't afford to have a carpenter make one, but I wanted us to have a proper place to eat together. I remember you making that," he said softly. "I thought you were just being, I don't know, dramatic." I led him to my study. "This," I said, pointing to a framed photograph of a small community center, "was my first commercial project. You were 14. They paid me £12,000. James studied the photo. "It's beautiful, Mom. I always thought your work was boring. But this is really beautiful. Do you know what I used that £12,000 for?" He shook his head. "Your first year's university tuition. And your books. And your accommodation." I saw something shift in his expression, a dawning comprehension that had been absent for years. We went upstairs to his old bedroom. "Every month, for 18 years," I said, sitting on his bed, "I put money aside for your future. Not for holidays, not for a new car, not for expensive clothes. For you." "Mom, I'm not finished," I said, my voice still calm, but with an edge of steel. "When your father died, I could have sold this house, moved somewhere smaller. But I didn't, because I thought you needed stability. I thought you needed a home." We walked back down to the living room. But somewhere along the way, I continued, my help became an expectation. And the expectation became a demand. And the demands became resentment when I didn't meet them. James was weeping now, silent tears streaming down his face. "Mom, I didn't know. I didn't know how much you'd sacrificed. But you should have known, James. Or at least you should have asked." He sat down heavily. "I've lost everything," he said. "My wife, my home, my reputation. I have nothing." "You have your life," I said. "You have your health. You have your skills." "What skills?" "I don't know how to do anything real." "You can learn. You can work. You can rebuild." "But how? Where do I even start?" I went to my desk and took out an envelope I had been keeping. "Here," I said, handing it to him. "What is it?" "The address of a homeless shelter in Bristol. And information for a job center that helps people find work. It's not glamorous, but it's a start." He looked at the envelope as if it might bite him. "That's it? What else were you expecting?" "I don't know. Money, maybe? A chance to fix things between us?" "James, I am giving you a chance to fix things. But not between us. With yourself." He was quiet for a long time. "Will you ever forgive me?" he finally asked. "I have nothing to forgive you for," I said. "Your behavior wasn't against me. It was against yourself. I was just the person standing in the way." "I don't understand." "James, I didn't cut you off because I stopped loving you. I cut you off because you stopped seeing me." The words hung in the air. "You didn't see me as your mother, as a whole person. You saw me as a resource. And when a resource can no longer provide what you want, you discard it. You call it a walking cash point and you move on. He doubled over, as if my words were physical blows. Is there any way, any chance, that we could? I don't know, I said honestly. Perhaps. But if there is going to be anything between us in the future, it will have to be built from the ground up. And it will have to start with you learning to see yourself as something more than someone who deserves to be given things. He stood up slowly, still clutching the envelope. At the door, he turned. Mom, when I figure out how to be the person I should have always been, will you still be here? I don't know, James, but the only way to find out is to try. I watched him walk down my drive, get into a battered-looking Ford Fiesta I didn't recognize, and drive away. This time, I felt no satisfaction, no vengeance, not even sadness. I felt a flicker of hope. For the first time in years, my son was going to have to learn who he was when no one was giving him anything. And maybe, just maybe, the person he discovered would be someone worth knowing.